I want to
go to Jack.
Mayor,
Jack.
And thank you for coming also. Talk a little bit about, set the stage for us back in the 60s of what Alaska was like, what Anchorage was like, and kind of the urban attitude towards the land claims. When it first got started, when it first started being mentioned.
My recollection was that there wasn't much discussion in Anchorage about native claims or rights. The business community wanted it to go away. It was an annoyance. They didn't understand it. I didn't understand it. Bob Atwood might have understood it. But it just go away. And I think I'm here because Tim, I had a contract with Alaska Pipleline from 71 to mid-72, and he thinks I advised Ed Patton and these guys. Well, what I think I was hired to help Harry Jameson, who was the first ARCO president, help him, assist him in doing an EIS for the industry. And our contact with the Bill Egan administration was John Havelock, who's sitting here. And I want him to engage himself in this discussion later on. And there's Steve Haycox, the supreme historian. So I just kind of feel that, and I think why I'm here is that in September of 70, now from what I've read in the history, Mike Gravel and those guys, Ted Stevens and others, were back doing the legislation, of course, and the industry had realized slowly, very reluctantly, the oil industry, that they would have to deal with this land claims thing, whatever that was. Hugh Gallagher, I have it in my book here about Hugh going to the head BP guys in London, and the chairman says to him, what is this this native thing, this native land thing? And Hugh realized he was the lobbyist, so he had to educate them slowly. But I guess to answer your question, it was late September of 70, Ed Patton, the president of Alaska, came to the chamber in Anchorage and said, the native land issue has to be settled by Congress or we're not going to get a right-of-way. And I wasn't hired at that point, and I was there, and the business community said, oh my God, Patton says it's true, it's true. And everybody got on board. Settle this damn thing, whatever it is, and we'll get our right-of-way. And he says, unless we help Congress settle this thing, we're not going to get a right-of-way. And I still remember that. And then I contracted to help them write their EIS, and we did that, and we gave it to the state, and the state was doing the same thing. Somebody will comment on the size of that EIS. I'm told it was the first and the biggest, and everybody had to get on board on that too. That's my recollection.
I want to go to Mayor Ita now. What were you doing during this whole angst of business, and what's the first beginnings of your recollections about it?
Actually, I want to say hello to senators here, governors, friends, and all the people, and thank you for this opportunity to be a panelist. And I was actually had just gotten out of the Navy in the military during the Vietnam conflict, right at the time that all of this was going on. So as a young man, I got to miss out on quite a bit of the initial efforts. But after I got out of the Navy in the early, right at the very late I think it was 69 or 70, that my first exposure was when I came home from the military. Of course, I knew a little bit of what was going on because I had an uncle, may he rest in peace, that was prolific letter writer to me. And he kept me informed on what was going on, and his line that I remember from back then in one of his letters was, "Uyo," that's nephew, "they're giving our land away." And that he said he was very concerned and that it was not right. And being off in a ship halfway around the world and all of this was going on was something that I still regret to this day, that I was not an active part of it. But I had good friends, Jake Adams, Oliver Levitt, that were within my age group, my sister, that were very active. So I was in the military then, but the first thing that was a direct impact to me in regard to ANCSA and the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, and at the time I did not have an inkling, a clue of how much impact this was going to have, and that was, I was driving a taxi in Barrow because there weren't too many jobs, and Tim knows that, and the senator, and our past mayor, George Amawak's father, was the owner of the taxi of the taxi business. He told me, "Hey, Edward, I've got these forms they want some roustabouts over there in Prudhoe Bay." And I said, "Oh yeah, what's going on?" He said, I think it's something to do with oil over there." And so I said, "Okay," and went about my business, and about a week later I said, "What was this again?" And so I filled out an application, and it was for ARCO subcontractor. It was for Rowan Drilling, and didn't think much of it, and he'd apparently sent it in, and about another week later he said, "Edward, you're apparently hired." And I said, "What was the title of that again I'm going to be hired as?" And he said it was roustabout. He said, "Okay, what's a roustabout?" And he said, "I think it's some kind of fancy name for a laborer." So I said, "Okay, I'll try it." And I had the good fortune, along with another fellow in the prep, to be hired and go to this place. Oh, one of the other things was, when he had first told me of Prudhoe Bay, I just said, "Oh, by the way, where is this Prudhoe Bay thing? I'd never heard it in our language." He said, "Oh, it's somewhere between Barrow and Barrow Island. I'm not real sure where it is, but it's somewhere out there." So I accepted the job and got on I think it was a 185 with my fellow INUPEP, and I had a cousin who'd already been out there, and he'd just come in and told me a little bit, "Man, you're going to work your butt off." I said, "Okay." So anyway, I went out there and landed in this, there was just an airstrip, and there was one building at the side of the airstrip, and me and Billy, the other man I went out there with, the pilot, we got our bags, dropped us off, and he proceeds to get on his plane, and looks like he's going to leave. I said, "Hey, isn't somebody going to be here?" He said, "That building is where you can warm up if it gets too cold. There's a helicopter supposedly that's going to come and pick you up." So we sat around, or stood around, for about 2.5 hours. Finally we started hearing a helicopter, and that helicopter was coming from, apparently drilled, it was Rowan Rig 29, and it was not a real good day. So anyway, he picked us up and proceeded to take us to this job site, a drilling rig. I had no idea, other than in pictures, what I was getting into. But the weather deteriorated. We were on the chopper, and we'd go by about 100-yard steps toward the Rig 29. And what's significant about that was that there was Rig 28, which was Arco's well that discovered oil, and Rig 29 was the confirmation well that was going on. And that's where I got my first exposure to the oil industry, was as a roustabout way back when. And little did I know, in the position that I am today, what impact that would have. And I use that little story as an example of where we were as a people in relation to what was about to happen. So I tried to get caught up as best I could on what had been happening and what ANCSA was all about, because my uncle influenced me in a lot of ways. And he had told me that Iñupiaq's life, as you know it, is about to change significantly. And he said, my way of life is not going to be there anymore. And he urged me, don't sign off on this. Because he lived off the land. He said, it's not their land, it's our land. And I use that point to illustrate two things: that it was not harmonious, and the issues of Prudhoe Bay right next door, and what was likely to happen. And he was blessed being a prolific reader and understood a lot of things that, as a young man, he's not too interested in too many things other than what's the priority of the day. So, but I go on, but that's where I got introduced into ANCSA, and I was there before the pipeline started. I was there when the creation of ASRC and the creation of the North Slope Borough was, and I just thank God for the privilege and honor of being where I am today, representing my people and the impacts that ANCSA and TAPS has had to us. So thank you.
I'm glad that you mentioned that it was not harmonious. It was something that Senator Gravel and I also talked about, because at various times I've heard people like Senator Stevens come to groups like AFN and say, you know, you guys need to come together and decide what it is that you want, because if you don't come to DC with a common issue or a common request, it's going to be really tough. And all of the Native groups that were coming together were from very different cultures, different languages, different parts of the state, and even, you know, my region, which is below yours, the Nano region, and Arctic Slope, we've even had some disagreements.
Oh, yes.
So,
I look back, and one of the blessings that we had was being in Mount Edgecombe, the boarding school for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and that's another whole story, as you know. They were trying to get us assimilated, and that experience was very fortunate, I believe, for ANCSA, because all of us, so many of us from different regions, all went to school together. A good chunk of the leaders were together at Mount Edgecombe, and we had common friends and interests, and I think that's what helped make the effort succeed. And I think that's another part of the story, that the influence of Mount Edgecombe Boarding School and where the leaders are today. My Al Adams, my good friend of Brenda, they were our mentors as we were freshmen in Mount Edgecombe, and we still look up to them today. But so many of the leaders that were active in ANCSA all had common interests, common grounds with our experience in Mount Edgecombe, because it was very close quarters down there, and we all were fortunate to have experienced that.